This video is brought to you by Squarespace, the best all-in-one platform for all of your website building needs. Hey guys, it's Celestia, and over the past few weeks, the art community has been very vocally and passionately divided over the recent release of the rules for ArtFight 2026. Specifically one of those rules, because it's reignited one of the oldest and most contentious debates in the art community, whether or not tracing is ever okay in any capacity during the creation of art. Because according to them, it isn't. For those of you who don't know, ArtFight is an annual art game lasting for the entire month of July, in which artists who sign up are placed on one of two teams. They can quote-unquote attack members of the other team by drawing the OCs that they've submitted character profiles for, and each team receives points based on the art made for each attack. Artists that receive attacks can then either reciprocate by attacking the artist who attacked them, or by attacking another member of the opposing team instead. At the end of the month, the team with the most points wins. So it's essentially an art gifting game that uses competition to incentivize artists to draw each other's characters, purely for fun and with no prizes or compensation involved beyond the art that's exchanged. But for fun or not, since it is still a competition as much as it's a game, it requires rules to ensure fairness for all participants. The problem is that the rule in question that's receiving so much backlash doesn't seem to ensure fairness at all. Many have actually argued that it impedes it instead. Per the 2026 rules, at least as of scripting this, it reads as follows. Bases, character creators, and doll makers may be used for character images, but must be credited. They may not be used for attacks. A, this includes websites like Picrew, Hero Forge, video game character creators, and other doll makers. B, this includes artwork traced from posable models such as Clip Studio Paint, Design Doll, and similar programs, self-made bases, and photographs you have taken. Most people find the first 2 points reasonable enough, but it's the last one that has sparked massive outrage from tons of artists calling it unfair, unreasonable, elitist, gatekeeping, and even ableist. It is worth mentioning before we discuss it further that contrary to what the vast majority of people are saying, this isn't a new rule. From everything I've read, it's been one for quite a while now, something ArtFight themselves confirmed via Discord in a statement assuring participants that it had been present in previous years, and that was why no feedback form was put out to request feedback on its introduction. I don't know how the rule was worded before, but based on what people have been saying, it sounds like it was fundamentally the same, but potentially less specific, and that this was probably always what they meant by it, but maybe as more of an implication rather than what they blatantly said. Many are saying that the way it's been reworded, if it has, is both more restrictive and more vague about what's actually being disallowed, which is one possible explanation for why it's facing so much more resistance and anger now than it did in the past. Regardless, in the same Discord message, ArtFight also announced that they've heard the feedback about the rule and that their moderators are discussing it. So who knows, there may have even been an amendment made to it by the time this video goes live, since I script long before I post. Even so, its existence in the first place and the public reaction to it both bring up some very interesting and controversial questions about tracing as a whole that I think are worth discussing, both in this context and beyond it. So that's exactly what I intend to do with this video. In it, I'll be going over my thoughts on tracing itself and whether it's ever okay to do, whether it should be allowed in this particular capacity in ArtFight specifically, and what all of this says about the contentious and largely misunderstood role of shortcuts in art altogether. But first, let me take a moment to thank the sponsor of today's video, Squarespace. I've been talking about them for so long now that the jokes about us being married have been going on for years. But trust me, my love for them started long before that. I've been using Squarespace to build websites since long before we started working together on the channel, and that's exactly why I'm always so happy to gush at you guys about them, because it's that experience that's led me to confidently say that, at least in my opinion, they're the best website building and hosting platform out there, especially for artists looking to create professional-looking portfolios. Despite how different my previous cutesy branded portfolio and my new revamped, more professional one are, both were just as easy to build, since Squarespace offers pre-built layouts for a wide variety of commonly used site pages, the ability to duplicate pages and individual elements, the option to add tons of different types of content from text and photos to audio, galleries, calendars, forms, and so much more. Portfolios are just the tip of the iceberg too, because they have such a huge versatile library of designer templates that they have perfect options for any type of site you could possibly want to build. All of them, by the way, can be just as easily turned into online stores, because they give you everything you need to do so. The ability to manage payments and inventory, handle shipping and fulfillment, and boost your SEO so that you're getting as many eyes on your site and potential customers as possible. It's perfect for selling physical goods like merch and paintings, but it's just as great for selling services like consultations, editing, and best of all, art commissions, because they make sure you have everything you need to do so. A streamlined workflow, built-in appointment scheduling, email marketing tools, and so much more. Your customers have just as easy of a time shopping as you do to selling too, because they offer all of the most popular payment methods like Klarna, ACH Direct Debit, Apple Pay, Afterpay, and ClearPay, and even allow you the option to send individualized branded invoices to specific clients, so you can start accepting orders from all around the world with just a few clicks. So whether you're an artist in need of a portfolio, an entrepreneur building an online store, a creator setting up an interactive blog, or a small business owner making a landing page, Squarespace is the place to do it. And you can find out yourself by going to squarespace.com to get your own free trial today. And once you've built the perfect site that you're ready to launch, you can get 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain by going to squarespace.com/Duchess Celestia, linked in the description. Thank you so much to Squarespace for sponsoring today's video, and please go check them out. Now, back to ArtFight. Well, first actually, let's get back to the issue of tracing as a whole, because it's obviously the main issue at the core of this entire controversy. I don't want to spend too long discussing it, as I've already done so extensively on the channel, so I'll try to summarize my personal opinions on whether or not tracing is ever okay to do. Although I know me, and I'm horrible at summarizing, so this will probably still be a bit. But the first of those personal opinions is that no matter what you're tracing, it's always both okay and beneficial to do it for learning purposes, rather than posting purposes, and is even taught as an exercise in a lot of art programs to learn from both reality and the work of trained, skilled artists. But when it comes to tracing another artist's work, I do believe that if you intend to share it outside of that personal study setting, that is never okay to do without that artist's consent and clear credit given alongside the acknowledgement that it is traced. Tracing photos found online honestly isn't much different to me. I believe that you should still get the photo owner's permission if you're posting the art that you traced over it to make, and provide similarly transparent, clear credit, because it's ultimately just another form of art that belongs to another artist. There is, however, the exception here that if the photos in question are from a royalty-free stock photo site like Pexels or Shutterstock, they don't require credit by nature, although Pexels does encourage people to give it anyway. And to me, I still think it's important to be honest about having traced it when posting the art created by doing so, at least if you directly, completely traced it exactly one-to-one. That's just me though, and not only is it just my opinion, it's one that I'm not even completely sure of, because this is such a subjective issue. Tracing 3D models that you've posed yourself or reference photos that you've taken yourself, however, is a very different discussion, because number one, they belong to you, and number two, you used your own skills to create them effectively. That's not effortless or valueless, and takes artistic understanding in and of itself to do so well. Personally, I think that's fine, and I don't even know if it needs to be disclosed. But again, not a steadfast view, just my gut response. But all of this has been based purely on the ethical side of the issue, and it would be a disservice not to also discuss the point of tracing's actual effectiveness as a tool. What you do or don't learn from tracing depends heavily on how you do it. If you're just tracing the core elements to use as a reference for your own piece, that is pretty straightforwardly fine to me, both in terms of its helpfulness and morality, no matter what you trace it from, since you're just creating a custom reference of the image's basic forms to build upon yourself. To show what I mean, here's an example from another video of me tracing the basic forms of the Mona Lisa and then using that traced outline as a reference for me to draw my own. Even if you just directly kept the rough traced outline of the base forms to use directly in the piece as a base, rather than using it as a reference, you still have to use both your own skill and creativity to build that into an actual piece of art, which still forces you to develop your skills as an artist rather than using tracing as a crutch to avoid doing so. You also end up adding so much of your own vision and reinterpretation to it that by the end of it, it's become its own piece of work and not a copy of anything, at least no more than anything inspired by another thing is. Tracing every detail directly, however, even disregarding the aforementioned ethical concerns, is much more dubious in terms of how helpful it is to you as an artist if done regularly. I discussed this in more detail in my video about how a lot of artists are using references wrong, but to summarize, if you copy a reference one-to-one without actually studying it, all you learn is how that reference looks in that specific pose or setting. You need to study why it looks that way to really learn anything more than that, because just doing the former will only allow you to draw it exactly as it is in that setting, while the latter will teach you to understand it, and therefore understand how to depict it in any. The same concept applies to tracing, in my opinion, as it's just another way to copy something one-to-one without necessarily studying or understanding what's being traced or why it looks how it does. And with 3D models in particular, directly tracing them is, in general, rarely beneficial or helpful at all, because the vast majority of them are very stiff, slightly off, or even physically impossible, at least without being extremely uncomfortable and unnatural, since you can pose them however you want, even if that pose isn't realistically possible or comfortable for a real human being. They're always janky to varying degrees, and they're much better used as guidelines than actual accurate references. So tracing them directly without using real knowledge of anatomy to understand how to make them work properly isn't gonna do you any favors, and it'll just result in your art containing the exact same errors present in the models. Exclusively tracing one-to-one without studying what you're tracing in the process or revising it to be more accurate using your own skill and understanding does tend to stifle learning long-term, because it essentially acts as a substitute for learning. Even if you are adding more to the base models that you're tracing, you're still not tracing to learn how to make those base models themselves. And even if you are actively using tracing to study how to do so, you'll eventually reach a progress plateau where you've learned all you can learn from tracing and need to start using what you've learned to try to draw without it if you want to continue to improve. In short, if you can't draw without tracing, I don't think tracing is really helping you, with a few notable exceptions I'll elaborate on later. Finally, as many people have mentioned during this discourse, tracing photos and personally posed 3D models has been the industry standard for a long time. Professional artists have been doing it for ages because of the immense pressure to get their work done as quickly as possible, but they've already long since developed the skills necessary to fix any errors present in the models and photos and reinterpret them effectively. So the fact that doing so doesn't force them to learn how isn't detrimental to them in the same way that it is for artists that are still learning the basics. They already know how. For them, it's simply a shortcut, not a substitute for skill, as it actually does require a significant amount of experience and skill to pose and trace those models and photos in a way that results in a piece of art that actually looks good, and they have that experience and skill. That's an important difference, and one that needs to be considered when making the argument, professionals do it, so should I, but also when making the opposite argument of, it's always bad and makes art worse. There's nuance to this, because it can be a tool to be utilized by a skilled artist, or it can be a way to try to skip becoming a skilled artist at all, depending on the context. Some have argued that by comparison, non-professional hobbyist artists making art just for fun have no reason or justification for tracing, since the reason professionals do it is pressure from employers to streamline their process as much as possible and finish as much work as they can in as little time as possible. Hobbyists, without that pressure, ostensibly have no reason or need to. Why would they need to use shortcuts like tracing if they're supposed to be enjoying the creative process no matter how long it takes? But I feel like that perspective neglects to consider 3 possibilities, if not more. Number 1, for a multitude of reasons, even hobbyists often want to get art done quickly. Maybe they have too many ideas and too little time and want to finish pieces fast so that they can move on to the next ones. Maybe they get anxious when they have unfinished works in progress and can't start new work until they're done. Maybe they work full-time jobs and have so little free time that they don't want to be stuck on the same piece for ages, making very slow progress. Maybe they have certain types of disabilities that make it difficult to spend long periods of time drawing and want to streamline their process as much as possible so that they can make progress without having to. There are a lot of reasons that hobbyist artists might enjoy the creative process while still not wanting it to take forever. Number 2, on the note of the creative process, not every part of it is equally enjoyable to everyone. Some artists find the initial sketching phase unbearable and enjoy the lining and rendering phase so much that they could do it forever. For them, tracing a model that they posed or a reference photo that they took themselves would actually provide them with significantly more enjoyment than sketching without it would, because it would allow them to spend less time on a part of the process that they get very little out of, and more on a part that they love. Number 3, aphantasia, a neurological condition that prevents those with it from visualizing images in their head, exists, and it makes creating art without references, or sometimes tracing, extraordinarily difficult for people who have it. This is the primary basis for people claiming that the ArtFight rule is ableist, as I briefly mentioned earlier. Artists with aphantasia are physiologically incapable of creating a mental image of something as simple as an apple, much less the complex theoretical concepts involved in the ideas that they have for art pieces, and many rely on tracing and references to create art at all as a result. I don't have it, and therefore can't really make any objective statement on this one way or another, but I have heard from some artists with it that so long as they have references readily available to consult that are in their line of vision as they're drawing, that's enough for them, and they're able to reference them rather than trace them. If that's the case, it would deal a pretty big blow to the credibility of the argument that artists with aphantasia need to trace. But others claim that even directly consulting references like that doesn't help them, and it just isn't enough. That suggests to me that maybe there's a spectrum of severity here in which some people with it can utilize references without tracing, and some genuinely can't. Although I feel like there might still be a gray area between the two in which some people with it actually could use references without tracing them, but are so sure that they can't that they just don't try or push themselves hard enough to learn how. But again, I wouldn't know, I don't have it, so that's nothing more than speculation. Regardless, I hope all of this has established at least some basis for my belief that tracing on its own does have its place in some settings and for some artists, and isn't a fundamentally bad practice. Now let's move on to the discussion of whether or not it has any place in ArtFight specifically, by addressing some of the possible concerns on their part that may have motivated the rule in question. Number 1, some have suggested that the likeliest reason this rule exists is to prevent participants from spamming quick, low-effort attacks, which would be unfair for artists who put a lot of work into theirs. While reasonable, I still think this logic falls short. The use of traced 3D models or reference photos in art's creation does not immediately mean the result was low effort, as we've already discussed that not all tracing is one-to-one copying, but sometimes just tracing the bare-bones shapes and forms, and skill and creativity are still required to refine anything traced from them to look correct and build them into full pieces that actually look good. And if an artist does just one-to-one trace a model without adding almost anything of their own to it, or reinterpreting it, or fixing any of the errors present in it, then yes, I personally agree that that crosses the line into unacceptably low effort. It would be easy to specify that that in particular is what the rule is prohibiting. And second of all, it's incredibly obvious when looking at the final product. It would be really simple to just report those attacks and handle them on an individual basis rather than blanket banning the practice altogether even when done right. People who trace that way are the exception, not the rule. Also, I feel like just implementing a submission limit would also prevent spam attacks probably more effectively anyway. But moving on. Number 2, some others are saying that the rule is essentially in place because tracing is viewed as cheating because it makes the creative process too easy. But arguably, couldn't the same be said about a plethora of other digital art tools like the undo tool, the liquefy and transform tools, gradient mapping, copy and pasting, and so on? They make it faster to do things, but only if you have the skill necessary to use them properly, and they don't achieve a visually appealing result if you don't. They don't make the art good for you. Tracing a 3D model or photo that you took, as we've established, doesn't achieve a visually appealing result if you don't have the artistic skill and understanding of anatomy necessary to do so in a way that treats the photo and model like a guideline to transform correctly. Where do we draw the line between the two, if any risk of theft is off the table since what's being traced belongs to the artist tracing it? I'm actually asking, because I feel like this is something that would benefit from discussion from multiple perspectives, and I certainly don't know the answer. Neither does ArtFight, though. Further though, isn't it a good thing for artists to be able to save time when participating in a time-consuming, labor-intensive competition in which there's notable pressure to create as many unpaid art gifts as possible? Obviously still while having fun, but you are generally still trying to contribute to your team winning while still balancing your attacks with your actual life and your other art. And being able to make those attacks faster would ostensibly make it less stressful and more fun. So long as the work they're making is still original, which it is, even if it's built on a foundation of a traced 3D model or photo that they posed or took, shouldn't they be encouraged to utilize shortcuts like that to save them time and make the process more enjoyable for them? Anyway, it's tangentially related, so let's move on to the third possible reason. They want to ensure that nothing owned or created by another artist is traced without permission or credit. Obviously, this is the primary motivation for the first two things the rule bans, but it literally can't apply to 3D models you pose and photos that you take, because by very nature, no one is being stolen from if they're traced. They belong to the artist who uses them. Who are they supposed to credit, themselves? Maybe their point is that crediting also involves transparency about tracing having been involved in the creative process, and that's the more important point that they want to communicate, that credit isn't just about who the original images belong to, but also the admission of how those images were used, because both are involved in the act of giving credit. But there's another rule that essentially says artists can use photos they don't own or have permission to use as backgrounds in their art without crediting them. So, I mean, they're saying that artists can't transform photos they own, but they can use other people's photos as they are that they didn't take and don't own without permission or credit as backgrounds. I feel like this is evidence that their stance on credit and utilization is blurred and unclear, seemingly placing more value on some parts of the creative process than others based on their own opinions. They seem to care more about maintaining the sanctity of the creative process based on their own definition of it than they do about actual ownership and copyright infringement. And that's an issue we'll come back to later. But for now, let's move on to the last argument that I've heard proposed as a motivation for the rule. Whether it's for fun or not, ArtFight is a competition, so it should be a fair fight. Tracing 3D models and photos gives some artists a speed advantage over those who don't. And on the surface, that is a fair point. But we also return to the same previous point of there being a plethora of shortcuts in digital art that some artists use and some don't. I don't use gradient mapping, and I rarely use the liquefy tool, purely out of personal preference. That doesn't mean I think it's fair to disallow other artists from using them just because it's time-saving for them and gives them a speed advantage I don't have, because I could use the same time-saving shortcut and am simply choosing not to. This, to me, seems fundamentally the same. So once again, why is this the shortcut they've drawn the line at? Maybe it was partially influenced by the long-standing distaste towards tracing specifically. Maybe it was because the use of standard digital art tools isn't viewed by them as a shortcut, despite the fact that 3D models are a built-in standard tool in Clip Studio Paint, mind you. Or maybe this is just seen as more of a shortcut than those tools. Regardless, that point brings me to the final section of the video, about how all of this is indicative of a wider point of contention within the art community, that shortcuts are fundamentally bad and lessen the quality and validity of the art created with them. One of the core issues with this entire ArtFight rule seems to be rooted in the idea that the use of this particular shortcut renders the resulting art low effort, which is an accusation that's been levied against digital art as a whole since its conception. It's based in the belief that the more time you spend on a piece, the better it is, which in some cases is true, because spending a long time perfecting a piece generally results in better quality work than if you'd rushed it. But in the case of digital art and the shortcuts inherent in it, the argument seems to have shifted to, even if two pieces of art look exactly the same, the one that took longer to make is better because that means it took more skill. And while that may sometimes be true, it certainly isn't always the case. I've addressed this before in my video about whether or not digital art is easier than traditional art, but to summarize, since it's not directly relevant, I believe that both require the same fundamental fundamental skills, and while digital art shortcuts diminish the need for some required of traditional art, utilizing them effectively requires the development of entirely different ones that traditional artists don't have or need. And as I refuse to stop reminding people, traditional artists use shortcuts too. I used an old makeup brush to save time painting trees in both of these paintings and then refined them afterwards, and I refuse to be told that that cheapens them and makes them less valuable than paintings in which I hand-painted every leaf. The same, I believe, applies to the use of shortcuts, including the tracing of models and photos that you posed or took yourself. Yes, it means they spent less time on that particular part of the process, but it also means that they spent many years developing the skills necessary to use those shortcuts so effectively that the piece turned out just as well as it would have if they hadn't. Value should be based on the final product and its quality, meaning, and expression, not how long it took to make. And being able to make it quickly while still making it good should be indicative of skill, not something that categorizes it as low effort. But I've rambled for long enough, so let me make my conclusion. In terms of the ArtFight rule specifically, I don't necessarily think it's completely wrong. Directly tracing every single detail of a photo of your own or a model that you posed one-to-one could be argued to be worth less points in the game than just tracing its basic forms and then building from there, if the end result is worse because the former was done, extending to art made without tracing anything. But I don't know how I feel about making that judgment on the final piece's quality based on time and effort. Is it unfair that one artist traced their handmade reference to create a piece of art that they used skill and creativity to transform into a well-executed final work, while another one did that without it? I don't know. Is it unfair that another artist is simply so much more experienced that they could make a piece in an hour that would look as good as one that would take a less skilled artist 30? I don't know. But what I really don't know is why these questions are even being asked about a for fun, for free art gifting game that's supposed to be open to anyone. We can't objectively weigh shortcuts and advantages against each other, and I don't know if it's pertinent to try at all. Sporting events and competitions address the issue by dividing participants by experience, age, and height and weight. And if ArtFight wants to implement rules this gatekeepy, arguably elitist, and based on a fair assessment of all participants' advantages, maybe they should do the same. But if not, if they want to keep this open to everyone equally, then in my opinion, everyone should be able to use the same tools, just like they're allowed to use different levels of skill and expertise. Obviously, low-effort spam attacks should be disallowed, but based on a report system and not a blanket ban. Above all else, I think the ambiguity of the rule is the problem more than anything, and clarification as to what it applies to and how it's enforced would be massively beneficial. If that clarification isn't given and this rule just persists as is, though, I mean, how are they going to enforce it? They can't possibly know when self-made references are traced. It's impossible. And I'm not saying break the stupid rule, but I am saying there would almost definitely be no consequences if you did, so do with that what you will. In general, though, I think the entire issue brings attention to a long-standing issue with the way that we equate time spent on a piece of art with both the effort required to make it and its value altogether, and the way that we equate the use of shortcuts with a lack of skill, rather than, in many cases, if not most, evidence of skill, and the prioritization of allocating effort instead to other more valuable parts of the creative process. But honestly, nothing would make me happier than to hear from you guys about this, because as I've said multiple times, my opinions aren't set in stone. I'm not even completely confident in them. I just think it's an important topic to discuss, and I would love to be challenged in the process. So please let me know what you guys think about all of this in the comments. Thank you for watching, and special thank you as always to channel members Joseph Solomon, TC Pratt, Hierarchy Saluzzo, Extinction Animation, Lorik Darkbolt 9481, Kazuna Endy, Grey Jazz, Drawing Amongst Stars, Another Foxboy, Pale Star Poppy, and Cybertory VT, as well as patrons Batman, Kyle Lowe, Kenny Yen, Crazy SR, Gentong, MG, Blah Mage, TC Pratt, Celine Moongazer, El Juchia, The Stray Dog, Decagon, Jenny Chan, Catbus, Lucy Yamajiki, Selena Bibi, Pride, Peel, Wingtang Wong, Marie Greer, Potato, Jazz, Voidwalker, Latte Tabby, Christian Cook, Adam Sorovietz, Doriaki, Varius, Hailstorm, Emo Queen Jules, Show, That's It, Craig, Scarlet Flame 234, The Names Are Gone, Luuko Woe, Art of Amethyst Fable, and Maho Stars, and I'll see you in the next one.